girl on fire. I'm not a victim, a girl on fire. I'll stand my ground, girl on fire. I've made a choice, I stand proud. I'm a girl on fire. I'm a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. I'm every woman. I have taken up arms and I choose to defend all that I hold dear. Independent and strong, you will not keep me down. You can't break me.
Lynette Oxley here for Tax Shack Tactical TV and Gosa Girls on Fire. 16 days of action for no violence against women and children. I'm here with Carina, a lady that I really admire. Welcome, Carina. You're a senior advocate and prosecutor.
A senior prosecutor.
Prosecutor, is that the correct term?
That's right.
You've done amazing work in your time. Thank you very much for taking the time out to speak to us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Can we start with a very general question? Who is Carina?
Well, I guess the short answer would be vibrational and vibrational energy. Nothing more and nothing less, but I guess that's just a very short answer, and considering that I still vibrate in the third dimension. Carina is probably very complex, but I would say that the work that I do had shaped my personality tremendously, and I would think that it also shaped the personality of the people that I'm involved with my child, for instance.
Where did you know for the first time that you wanted to go into law, and did you think that your career would go where it did?
No, I can't honestly say it was all planned. I initially considered studying drama. My mum then told me that to study drama, I would have to meditate naked with the lecturers. Now, no 17-year-old girl wants to hang out naked anywhere. The only time you really have a body to show off that you don't want, and then you don't want to. But in any event, I later found out she was right. I thought it was just good psychology. But in any event, so I didn't want to do that. So I decided I had then a decision between computer science, because my father was a computer programmer, and law, because I love debating. And I love just arguing with anyone that comes along. So, and because I enjoy acting, I just thought law and drama actually do come together very nicely, and especially for the prosecution. It wasn't just naturally I evolved into becoming a prosecutor. I think even at university already, criminal law was the part of law that interested me most. In fact, I hated private law. Contractual law was even worse. So I loved criminal law, criminal procedure, etc. So it was just natural for me to end up in law. Once I became a prosecutor, that was just at the turn of democracy. So there were a lot of things happening in terms of promotion of gender-based violence or female rights, women's rights. So it was a fantastic field to work in at the time. And it was also the one field specializing specifically. Initially, I specialized in women's rights, what we called it then, women's rights. And that is also where psychology and law meets. And psychology has interested me as much as a law had. So I'm very happy that my life worked out in the manner that I did end up doing what I am doing, because I think it means a lot to me as well.
So which areas of the law do you specialize in specifically? It's still gender-based violence.
Indeed. Gender-based violence consists of a variety of offences. So initially I specialised in sexual offences, which is a form of gender-based violence, specifically sexual offences and attempted murder or murders. So I did most of the cases where children were victims of sexual offences and where women were abused by their living partners, so interpartner violence. Then, because sexual offences were perpetrated, and most of my career, I would say, it was never less than 40% of all sexual offences would have been committed against children. So between 40 and 60%, depending on which area and which time of year. So eventually I started specialising specifically against offences against children. So it evolved from sexual offences to physical abuse of children. And my last specialisation probably was, in terms of gender-based violence, was specifically the sexual abuse of children, the physical abuse of children. And it's actually incredible how often babies do get tortured to death in their homes by their parents, by their caregivers, very often the maternal caregiver. So then and then it evolved. Then I've become part of the international, the national coordinating structures for trafficking, for human trafficking. So then I started specialising in human trafficking. So I would say most of my work I'm doing currently would be in human trafficking.
That's really scary.
That
for
is
me.
a very scary field.
Because there's some, and that is where my next question comes in. Do you think there's true evil out there?
Indeed, there's definitely true evil out there. What makes the evil even more scary is the fact that you can't identify it. And I wish it came in a certain form or in a certain, with a stamp or in a certain colour that you can see. But now it doesn't. So so it's very difficult to identify evil, and that is why victimology and victimization, or understanding of victimology and victimization, is so important, so that you can identify the evil and the impact that the evil has had on people's behavior. Because I think if you don't quite understand victimization and that evil, what the evil really encompasses, you won't be able to understand victims, or you won't, and especially in human trafficking, if you don't understand the whole picture in terms of victimology and victimization, you won't be able to correctly identify your victim or even correctly identify your perpetrator. So knowledge again is really important, but also a certain understanding and willing to accept that evil comes in all forms.
You're very, very passionate about your work. Do you think the darkness sometimes touches you?
It does, but I think us with the NPA, we have a benefit. The fact that we can cross-examine the perpetrator. In other words, you challenge the perpetrator. And that I find debriefing. People laugh at me, especially my colleagues don't, because they understand what I say, but people in private practice that's not part of the prosecution laugh at me when I say I find cross-examination debriefing. I find court work debriefing. That's where I debrief. That's where I offload, because your focus is so on the facts of the matter. And I would say very much other experts in cases as well. I mean, a psychosocial expert or a medical expert, forensic clinical expert, if they don't focus on the evidence collection, that will get too much for you. So, but we are focusing so much on the facts that there is no time really to suffer trauma. I always say as well, to me, trauma and emotions are evidence. And that is how I also work through that, because I just put it in compartments where I'm going to use it in the trial. But otherwise, in terms of my private life, I make sure that my private life is very, very different to my professional life. In other words, I'm a vegetable gardener, so that means light. And I've learned through vegetable gardening that the word full sun is as wide as God's.
Absolutely.
I mean, really, full sun
Or partial son, and then
yeah, I mean, partial son in Johannesburg is very different to partial son in
Absolutely.
Benoni, or partial son in Cape Town, or even partial son in Tokyo. I mean, so yeah, when I read full son, I just think, okay, well, let me rather plant you in a pot, and I can move you. And yeah, so, but that is also what makes me understand how important light is. And I think that is really what we do with criminal trials, is that's where you bring the light into that darkness.
Yeah.
And I see with my plants as well, you can plant 3 seedlings at exactly the same height in one pot. One thrives, the other 2 not. And it's just the one gets more sun. The sunlight reached it better, or it's just better placed in the wind.
Or something happens to one of them. I've just, out of 5 bean plants, I've had 3 that survived now, and 2 that's not survived. And
now I see my pigeons is also not contributing much to my garden, because they go sit on the plants and then gone.
It's, but it is a psychology, and I've looked at, I've been in a couple of cases that I've supported delivery at Jezreel recently, and the guys look very normal, and there's just no emotion.
Yes.
They don't really see that they're doing something wrong, and at least, as you say, it's just
absolutely incredible. I'm now thinking of the Sunday rapist. He was very, very interested in the pretty journalist that was covering the case. But I mean, absolutely no insight. He had an interview with one of the, I think she was from Beeld at the time. I forgot her name now, a beautiful young lady. And the way he would talk to her, like, you know, like he spilled very hard-earned food before we could eat it, or not like he killed someone's child and raped 9 other people's children.
So one out of the car, one jumped out of the car.
Well, he killed 2 children, you're right, I forgot about a child that died. And I mean, he would say, like, he knows God I mean, yeah, anyway, so you're right. I mean, it's just that...
He's one of those people, if you actually look at him, there's nothing, and he actually loved the attention that he got in court.
Absolutely. Oh, he loved that attention. But really, you would not have looked at him and identified him as the psychopath and the monster that he was. Absolutely not.
They live amongst us, I think.
They live amongst us, and they have access to our children, and that's even scarier.
It is absolutely scary. Do you think, in South Africa specifically, do you think rape is more reported, or an abuse is more reported, or do you think it's in the increase, or do you think it's a lot more in the open because of social media and all kinds of other stuff?
That is a difficult call to make. Now, I know that government since '94 had done immense amount of the government's response really goes far and wide to make reporting easier, specifically because the statistics at the time showed that only 1 in 10 people reported their sexual abuse. So a lot of effort had been put in. I recently read a book, old book. It was written probably in '98 or published in '98 somewhere, by Joanne Fedler. I think you would probably know of her. She was then at Power. I can't recall what the book's name is, but Rape, Myths and Other Fairy Tales, I almost think. And every suggestion that she had made in that book for government to improve government's response to which gender-based violence had been complied with, with the conscientious training, social context training for government officials. I mean, that is part and parcel of all our training material, would include social context. The sexual offences court, the dedicated sexual offences units, which I am now part of, the sexual offences and community affairs unit, based in all provinces, with the head, the main in the head office in Pretoria. Through the NPA and through the unit that I'm now stationed at, the sexual offences or the SOCA unit, we also established Tutuzela Care Centres. The previous director for the SOCA unit, Advocate Tokumachukwene, who's an ambassador now. I'm not sure which country to, South African ambassador, but in any event, she traveled the world to find the best practices, and it was found that the best manner to improve reporting of sexual offence or improve reporting of gender-based violence, improve investigation, improve prosecution, and decrease, tremendously, significantly decrease secondary victimization is a one-stop service centre. In other words, where from the onset your victim becomes the centrality of the management of that sexual offence case. Remember, this is the NPA. So all our matters will eventually, all our efforts is geared or aimed at eventually a successful prosecution to provide access to justice. Because not only a victim that doesn't report, it's not only that that victim doesn't get that opportunity to bring the dark, the bad out in order for the healing, the light to come in. That victim also never gets access to justice because of the lack of reporting. So that is the reason why the Tutuzela care centres were established. Specifically, that's where a victim can come in, immediately trauma containment, immediate evidence collection through a clinical forensic examination, immediate consultation with a social worker in terms of psychosocial treatment, and of course within 20 days a prosecutor would consult with that victim. That and of course court preparation before the victim has to testify also would also occur at the Tutuzela Care Centre. We find that really improves the ability of the victim to become a credible and reliable witness. And it's actually quite interesting that very few people understand that a credible witness is not necessarily a reliable witness. In other words, sometimes I tell the truth. I think it's the truth. I think you are the one that robbed me. But it wasn't you. It's a wrong identification. Once we do the DNA, we realize, oh no, it's your twin sister. She looks or it's a person that looks very close to you. So I was credible when I said you were the one, but I wasn't reliable because I made a mistake. So for a witness to not only be credible, but to be reliable, so the court must be able to understand that what she's saying is definitely the truth. That would require us to make the victim central to the investigation, or what we call the management of the case. And not only do we, what we also try to do through the Tutuzela care centres is to provide aftercare, in other words, after the victim has testified. And that is actually fantastic. That is one thing that I've noticed through my career is, while, especially gender-based violence, I remember I had this one case, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful woman. She was 31, very wealthy background, and her husband stabbed her 7 times in the back, and she ended up in a wheelchair at age 31. And I remember she did very, very well prior to the testimony because we were in conversation constantly. And she could phone me at any point in time. Once she testified, I could see, then I wasn't that available. And you could see that there was a miss for her. She really needed attention after. And I think that happens in a lot of rape cases. There was also years ago a journalist, Shalene Smith, that was raped. And she reported a lot of what she experienced, which was a good thing at the time. I think that was also in the late 90s, so that was when government was still learning a lot about victimology and victimization, because we didn't have those opportunities in the 80s. That only became available after 94. So I also learned a lot through what she reported. And the one thing that she reported, which I noticed myself, is everyone is willing to talk to you, because we all know the best way to get rid of trauma is really to talk about it.
Absolutely.
And the more you talk about it, the better. And she was also saying, for the first 2 months, everyone listens to you. But then no one wants to. They want you to now get over it and carry on with your life. This is not something you get over.
No, you don't.
You just listen. You have to learn to live with the pain. And I can't tell someone it's not time that you get to live with the pain or not. That is why I don't refer to people as victims of crime as survivors. It's for them to call them survivors. It's not my call to make for myself to say, I've given you these services to turn you from victim to survivor. I expect you now to be a survivor. It's not my call to make. But what we are trying to do as government, and specifically through the Tutuzela Care Centres, is to turn victims into survivors, so that when they eventually move away from us, that it's long after they've given testimony and that they can truly say they're survivors.
Because it does, one of the most difficult interviews that I actually had last year was a very well-known case where a lady got raped by 8 guys. She was brutalized. She was not very educated. They got out of jail. They were back in the community, and there was no support system for her. And she was, all I could see, I could not see a survivor in there. All I could see is that bitterness, and I don't know if she will ever get over it. And that actually got to me, because she didn't do anything. She's there, and that's her life. She can't have children because, and that is something that she wanted. And it was just one of the worst interviews I've ever had, because I could see still, it was a good couple of years after it happened, the bitterness was still there, but raw. You talked about these centres and stuff, and one of the questions that I was going to ask you, there's basically 2 things that I wanted to go back to, but the one was, it's got to be a well-oiled machine, and you say the victim has got to be the centre of the attention. The DNA labs has got to work. When they report it, it's got to work. The prosecution's got to work. Everything's got to work. Is that really working in South Africa? Is all of the support systems in place? Is it a well-oiled machine, or
it's very difficult for me to answer on behalf of everyone. So I can basically just refer to the cases I work with. And either I'm extremely privileged, or things just work out for me. But I've had fantastic service providers in terms of expert witnesses. I think the biggest problem really comes in the fact that we always expect DNA. We expect medical, clinical forensic evidence. We expect injuries. There are a variety of reasons why you're not going to get injuries, and even on young children. I think people find it difficult to understand that you can actually sexually penetrate a 4-year-old or say a 3-year-old without leaving injuries. You can sexually penetrate a 15-year-old. In fact, you can make a 15-year-old, you can impregnate a 15-year-old without rupturing the hymen. So I think there are a variety of reasons why you won't. So prosecutors shouldn't be too stuck on the fact that I need corroboration from those areas, because sometimes your corroboration comes in other forms. I think, for instance, on the Bob Hewitt case, there were no forensic, there were no medical evidence, because the children didn't report it immediately. The one did report, but the case didn't go very much further, and the medical examination, if it was conducted, then it didn't survive the 40-year, because the docket went missing. But the other 2 did not report, and the one was in any event it didn't inflict injuries, the assault. But so the corroboration came in the letters that he had written to the one child during the time that the abuse took place. So corroboration can come in many forms. I was thinking of the Sunday Rapist case, one of the cases that made a very, very big impression on me, and specifically because the perpetrator was such a psychopath, was such a person, such an abnormal person, and such an absolute normal.
He was married, he had a child, and
his wife never, I really honestly believe that she didn't suspect it. So in that case, the corroboration came with Professor Labuschaghni's profiling. I mean, his similar facts. So we took, because luckily his modus operandi was very, very different to your average rapist, because he kidnapped them from one scene, he would take them to another scene where he would rape them, or where he conduct certain behavior in a similar manner that he did with every one of them. He also used disguise, so none of them could identify.
It was a little bit of a crazy disguise, if I remember right.
Yeah.
It was like a wig and
with very big glasses,
yeah.
and a cap. But it was a specific disguise, so it was similar in every case. So if you used a different disguise, say the one case dreads, the other one blonde, we would have found it more difficult to consider the similar facts. But because he was so, and we could link him with cell phone location. So those were the corroborations. So, but also those are experts that provide the cell phone location data, and of course Professor Labuschagne, that was Colonel Neetling that provided the cell phone. So it's also an expert field, and then Professor Labuschagne. So in my cases it worked, and I would never have had a conviction in any one of my cases if those fields did not work. I mean, my case depended on them.
This case is the Sunday rapist. You also mentioned the Bob Hewitt case. Which of the other cases touched you?
Well, I would say the first case that really got to me was the Herman case. It's also the only case that I ever cried in court. I see the court record later. I argued the appeal, and I saw the record didn't reflect. And no one said a word. I just sat down, and the court didn't say anything, and I just got up when I composed myself and carried on. And so luckily the court record didn't reflect it. But Herman was, I just had my baby, and the deceased, she tortured the child. It was an adopted baby. She was 21 months old when she died. She was really tortured to death. The perpetrator actually ruptured her liver. So that baby was in immense pain for 4 days. The hospital couldn't find out why the baby keep on losing blood. She didn't disclose to the hospital that there was a major accident, and the baby passed away 4 days later. But considering how that baby was treated in her care, it's sad to say, but it's probably better for that baby to have died then. But in any event, I remember my baby was 21 months old when I got that case, and the baby was lying on the post-mortem table with the Pampers nappy on, and I just couldn't take it, because my baby, and across from where I looked up from the docket, my daughter, the photo of my daughter in her Pampers nappy on the wall. And that just got too much for me. And I think it's also just it was 9 months after I gave birth. Yeah. Oh, 21 months, no, but it was 21 months. Oh, no, my baby was 9 months in that Pampers photo. But the baby that died was 21 months when mine was 21 months. So that was an extremely, extremely sad case. But again, there I relied strongly on the evidence of the expert forensic pathologist. The other case that really got to me was the Jessica Collins case. She tortured her baby or killed her baby when the baby was 4 months old, but what really got to me that Jessica was only 23 years old when she was convicted. And what really got to me is Joburg, I did the case in Joburg Magistrates Court, and Joburg Mag doesn't have cells for women. So she was sitting in court, not in a cell, while waiting for our case. And because that was the only case I did, I often chatted with Jessica before the trial. And she had a scar somewhere on her face. And I asked her, where did that scar come from? And she said to me, she explained, she said that was the last time she saw her parents, and there was a fight, and her mum hit her with a plate over the head, and she was for 2 months in the hospital, and when she was taken out of, she said she was for very long. It transpired later that it was 2 months. She was 5 years at the time, and she said when she was discharged from the hospital, she never saw her parents again, and she wanted me. She said her parents lived in Henley Klip or Vereniging there area, and she really wanted me to see if I can find her parents. She really wanted to see them again. And I just thought it was very, very sad, and that is also probably why she treated her baby, because the baby died of head injuries, and it was no obvious bruising. So the allegation was that she beat the baby against a flat surface, probably because baby was crying. Because once they fracture the baby's ribs, and the baby's ribs was obviously, all my babies had fractured ribs, the deceased babies, though then the baby becomes a lot more difficult to deal with, of course. And that is when the violence increased. And I think Jessica eventually hit her head against some hard surface in any event. But what was really sad, what got to me, is when the pre-sentence report came out, it was nothing of that in the pre-sentence report. So Jessica didn't think it important enough to tell that to the social worker. And that is immensely mitigating. That is definitely a mitigating factor that any perpetrator or any accused person would mention. But because Jessica had no concept of what had happened to her as a child, in other words, she didn't understand nurturing. She didn't understand that why she was removed from her parents' cares, because they would have killed her. So Jessica never had the ability to nurture. And I think that is very often where we sit with parents. And I honestly think that is the reason why we have the gender-based onslaught that we have, gender-based violence onslaught that we have currently, is because of our lack of nurturing. I was also sitting in a men's forum once and looking at, or just imagining a lot of things that the people were saying, men in terms of their experiences in a South African context. And it's actually, it then suddenly occurred to me, there are so many boys that grew up without anyone ever putting them on their lap and say, I love you, my boy. Or a boy falling, hurting himself, crying, and say, oh, I see you got hurt. Cry, my boy. You're allowed to cry if you get hurt. A lot of boys in this country get grown up for, why are you crying? Stop it, you're not a sissy. Or, mom is not allowed to hug boy because that would make him a sissy. It's actually, I mean, that realization is terrible. It's terrible how we treat our children.
And culturally, we also not, women do not speak up. So that's my next question. Do you think women are treated like second-class citizens in South Africa as such? Because a lot of times, I've read a lot of people that I've spoken to saying, somebody gets raped, they basically may be late for work, but that's about it, because they don't see that they don't speak up when they do get raped or abused at home, or because we've been taught to not speak up.
Yeah, it's also very much a cultural thing.
Yeah.
I remember it was also very, very long ago. When was it? It was probably around about, I think about 2012, maybe a little bit earlier, but in any event, there were research done, and I can't recall by whom, it could have been Power, but in any event, one of the researchers also interviewed me, but one thing that she said, it was door-to-door, literally door-to-door research. One thing that she said is, what she finds very strange, is in the, specifically the Muslim Indian communities and the white Afrikaans communities, there are no sexual assaults because people are so conditioned not to talk about it.
Exactly.
And it's probably the environment where you would find sexual assault most because it's so kept under wraps. I also had a child, she was 11 years old, she was sexually abused by her maternal grandfather. And she eventually started self-mutilating. She would scratch herself until the blood goes. And she said she did disclose to her mum, And I asked her, Mum, did she tell you? And Mum said, yes, but we don't talk about sex in this house. So that child was abused for about 3 years after she disclosed to Mum, because we don't talk about sex in this house.
If you look at the Olivia Jazreel case as well, she told the mom and dad never believed her.
But I would honestly not think that it's only women.
No.
I think honestly men suffer from the same.
Absolutely.
Unfortunate. We become dehumanized if we work with crime so much and we see such toxic behavior, we're constantly exposed to toxic behavior, and trust me, it doesn't just come from men. There are a huge amount of toxic women as well.
Absolutely.
And I think one thing that we don't realize is if a woman is a victim of interpartner violence, that creates an immense amount of mental health problems. And that woman becomes incapable of nurturing her children. I've done a case, it was a case where a couple of boys were video recording them having sex with a girl that that ended up on CNN. It became viral, the clip. The girl transpired to be mentally disabled, but she wasn't obviously mentally disabled. She was 17 years old, but not obviously disabled, and the boys did pay for her. But in any event, the boys were between 14 and 17. So we wanted to, and I mean they filmed it, so we know there was consent and they did pay her. So we wanted to divert the boys, so we needed to get diversion assessment reports. And the one thing that all these boys had in common, they were exposed to domestic violence, which caused their mothers to suffer from mental health problems, which caused their mothers to be at home but not at home. In other words, the mom is merely there to cook and clean. The mom is not there to give any form of nurturing. And the one boy, it was so sad. All these pictures we made them, the counselor, the therapist that assessed them, made them decorate suitcases. So on the inside, they have to decorate it according to who they are, who they really are, and on the outside, how they want to be seen. And on the inside, the boy, all he did is just footsteps, just a car going out of the suitcase, footsteps going out of the suitcase. So everything of his is just to get out of his inner self, because there is no nurturing. And those boys, they were then part of the diversion program, as they had to do life skills training at that particular organization that did the assessment. And those boys were so willing. The psychologist was saying to me, when the transport didn't arrive, the boys started walking to go to Sophiatown where they were getting their therapy. So there is a need for nurturing among our boy children, not just among our girl children. And I do think, however, that in terms of government's response, government has done a lot to elevate the situation of women. I mean, if we look at the 2018 presidential summit, if you look at the 2022 presidential summit, how often do you actually find presidents that present and that willing to respond to the onslaught of gender-based violence? I don't know another country where we can honestly say that president, the political will is as present as it is in our country. But we still have a problem, but I don't honestly. And then if you also think about the Gender-Based Violence Council, I mean, this is a council that is well funded. This is a council with really expertise on it, of which the government representation would be from the president's office. I mean, Professor Olive Shoshana would be the co-chair of this council, and she's from the president's office. So really, on the highest level, there is political will to do something about gender-based violence. But as I say, I think at this point in time, our responses are focused and aimed of the improvement and the nurturing of women and women's rights, women and children. But we often, if we look at children, we often only include the girl child. I really think all our responses and our efforts should be extended to absolutely make it sure that we do include boys.
Because we live in a society, if the perpetrators are boys, they're perpetrators for a specific reason. If you maybe nurture them at a different level from childhood, they might not become perpetrators.
Exactly. I mean, if you as a child never got nurtured, how are you going to nurture your wife? How are you going to nurture your children? You didn't know. You don't know what it is. And what I didn't know until I started working with human trafficking is that nurturing is a life skill. I thought, your little girl child would pick up a doll and put the doll on her back immediately and begin. You just thought it comes natural, but it isn't actually. They are mimicking what they see. So if all as you see is someone getting a slap or you just getting a slap, of course that's how you're going to behave eventually. I always say we can't treat our children the way we treat them and then expect them to become nurturing, fantastic adults. We must treat them in the way that we want them to become. Nurturing is an extremely, but I mean in terms of violence, boys are, if you look at Stats SA, boys are 5 times more likely to die, well, let me rather qualify, boys between the age of 15 and 29 are 5 times more likely to die a violent death than girls. So it's not like they're not at risk, and of someone known to them. We think that only girls get murdered by someone known to them. It's not so. Boys, I mean, these gangsterism, and that's not always a boy's choice, whether a boy's choice, whether he wants to become a gangster or not. Sometimes that environment doesn't allow him any choices.
Absolutely.
So I think we really do need to acknowledge, and I think we need to make our responses South Africa specific. We are a specific community.
Yeah.
But one thing that makes GBV easier to police or to combat or to prevent than, for instance, human trafficking is the fact that the same society or the same community that breeds victims also breeds perpetrators, which is not the same with human trafficking. Human trafficking, your perpetrators come from another environment, but not gender-based violence and interpersonal
That's
violence.
a very interesting point. Trafficking, very bad in South Africa. I hear it's an increase. I've seen some footage and stuff, and that's something that really
It is, and it's a difficult crime to police. It's a difficult crime, but again, I mean, really, government cannot be faulted with its response. We are trying so hard, and again, I mean, our political principles really, they attend meetings, they push for amendments to legislation. So really, the political will is there to respond in a manner that can prevent and combat human trafficking. But it is probably one of the worst crimes that can be committed against you.
Sure. You once said, be the change that you want to see. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I find South Africans very, very easy to complain. We always, this is not working, that is not going well, this is not. Until you actually point out to them, it can work if you make it work. I mean, people would say, the DNA is taking so long, Yeah, well, it does take long, but sometimes you can actually prove your case very definitively without DNA. Do it. There are more that we can do to ensure that we see the community develop the way that we know is the only way that it needs to be for our children to thrive. So what I would really want to see is a community that makes it possible for all children, even the children that comes out of sad homes, for all children to thrive. And we have to change in order to make that possible. But yes, I feel actually very strong. I get quite annoyed with people that sit around, and I mean, I have maybe attended just too many meetings where I just sit around and I listen to everyone's problems, but no one offers a solution. And then nothing is going to change if you can just tell me what is wrong, but you can't deal with it in a way that can be fixed. And I often, and I really honestly think, if you just change your mind and you just change your perception to understand that you can change what you cannot live with. In fact, you have to change what you cannot live with. Then it becomes a lot easier. And I also say, visualize the outcome you want, and it does work.
So very much what I'm saying, what's your message for 16 days of action? Because it doesn't help to talk about it, you need to do something about it. Have you got a message for the women out there?
The only message I can think of that is very important to me now is speak out. Speak out for your own rights, for yourself. Speak out for the innocent, even if you're scared and even if your voice shakes.
Thank you very much for all that you're doing for South Africa and for the women of South Africa. Thank you very much, Carina.
Thank you very much for
Thank you very much.
You will not keep me down, you can't break me. I'm a girl on fire, I'm not a victim. A girl on fire, I'll stand my ground. Girl on fire, I've made a choice, I stand proud. I'm a girl on fire. Countless hours on the range, I am responsibly armed. I am your equal. I've empowered myself, I have practiced and trained. Fear won't control me. With my sisters in arms, we will make ourselves heard. We'll stand together. I'm a girl